I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Roger Canaff. He is a former New York City special victims prosecutor and a renowned expert on sexual violence and trauma, a past president of End Violence Against Women International and charter member of Counter Quo. He he brings decades of experience as a prosecutor and advocate for survivors. He's appeared on CNN and HLN, as well as numerous other outlets, offering his expertise on headline making cases. So, Roger, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sure. Thank you for having me. No, I appreciate it.
So, kind of take me to the beginning, kind of say how you got into being a special victims prosecutor and what kind of inspired you to be kind of go down that road for employment.
Sure. I didn't say this for a long, long time. It's a part of my public sort of thing now, but I am a survivor of child sexual abuse myself, when I was very young. And honestly, I never thought that that had a direct correlation. There's probably an army of psychologists that would disagree with me and say, "Oh, come on, something back there encouraged you to get into this work because it was a part of your life." And I'm sure that that's true, but honestly, I'm sure it informed it. But by the time I was in law school, I knew, I had sort of a little bit of a bent for law enforcement. Of course, I was becoming a lawyer rather than a police officer, and I figured this was just a good fit for me. I think I have a pretty strong amina, sort of what's sometimes called a feminine side, and I very much enjoy working with women and children. I mean, I've certainly worked with men, with people with disabilities, with all sorts of folks who have suffered sexual and domestic violence. But in general, I think I work with the population real well, and it just seemed like a good fit for me. And it was a terrific place for me to. I didn't well. I started in prosecution like most rookies, where I started in Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. So I sort of worked my way up through traffic and basic criminal. And then, but within about 3 years, not even, about a year and a half, I guess, I was invited to go ahead and take some of the special victims docket, which was just at the time was just considered child abuse cases and domestic violence cases. And there weren't many men that wanted to do it at the time that I got into it in the late 90s. And I think because of that, I kind of got pulled into the training circuit fairly quickly after that, just because there just weren't many men that were doing this kind of work or talking about it.
So has it kind of been more open up to men? Have men been more vocal about it since then, or is it still kind of a topic that gets pushed under the rug?
No, I think we're doing much better. I mean, the American prosecution community has always had a little bit of, and I'm sure it still does, there's a little bit of a cowboy mentality, not dissimilar to police forces, to law enforcement in general. People who get into prosecution, it's still kind of a male heavy profession. there are plenty of fantastic female prosecutors out there, but traditionally it was most men that went into prosecution wanted to do gang cases, they wanted to do homicide cases, things of that nature, and they tended to shy away from special victims cases. And a lot of that's just, it's just sort of rank sexism. It was, and not only against women but against men too, because I think there were a lot of leaders, most of them male, who kind of felt, well, these cases are really not appropriate for men to do. A child's not going to want to talk to a man, a woman's not going to want to talk to a man. If there's a child abuse or a sex assault case, let's find a female in the office and assign it to them. And oftentimes that is the right thing to do, but not always. So, there's no reason, obviously, that men can't prosecute these cases as long as they understand rapport and as long as they're gentle and as long as they understand dynamics and things of that nature. And I think I understood those very well. But to finish answering your question, yes, I think we're much, much better from a societal standpoint. Men are much better at talking about this in terms of their own victimization, if that has occurred. And I think they're much better at understanding the dynamics that are involved in victimization too. So we're getting better.
From your time when you were the prosecutor, are there any stories that you can share of people that you've been able to work with that have really left a huge impact on you?
Oh gosh, yeah. I have had, wow, I mean several, but there are a few that really stand out. Obviously I would never name names, but I had, early in my career, I had a couple of individuals, two young women who had been, unfortunately, they had been sexually abused by their own father, and sort of one kind of right after the other. It was just incredibly sad because the older one did not disclose, which is very common. Most kids still don't disclose. And in this particular situation, the older sister finally disclosed, and she disclosed when she went off to college. So all the years that this sexual abuse was happening to both her and her little sister, she did not say anything to anybody, and the little sister didn't either. This is just how they felt that they had to deal with it and sort of keep it a secret, which is very common. And then when the older sister finally felt safe, when she was no longer a child, she was out in a college environment, she disclosed. That's how the investigation began. At that point, we determined that both girls had been sexually molested. Father was indicted. We went through the investigation, the process. He eventually pled guilty. But that's just one example, of a really powerful case. Just terrific people involved on the part of the investigator I work with, the mom of the two young women, the young women themselves. It was just very sad all around, but it was very inspiring because I do think it made a big difference to them to finally feel validated and to feel as if somebody had taken them seriously. And frankly, with many cases, that was always the probably the most rewarding thing. I didn't win all of these cases. I won a decent amount, got plenty of pleas. That was good. But even in times when I didn't win, I think, meaning we didn't get a conviction, almost always the people involved, most of the time children, felt really terrific that not overall, of course, but I think it was an inspiring thing for them to feel as if the system had taken them seriously and that somebody had actually believed them and somebody had brought their case forward and sort of given them their day in court.
Over the years, what have been some ways that you've seen um these victims kind of find their way? Like I know for men, there's like before social media kind of became a thing, this used to be more of an in-person thing. Do you see more people become victims over social media and have fallen victim to people or over social media over the years?
Oh my God, absolutely. Social media, unfortunately, has just been uh, has had a tremendously negative effect on victimization. And that's not to say social media hasn't brought us plenty of good things. It has. It's brought people together. It's allowed people to stay in contact with old friends, with family. There are all sorts of wonderful things that social media does for us in terms of enriching our lives. But unfortunately, from a predator standpoint, social media is extremely dangerous and it's only getting worse. And the thing that we're seeing now, at first it was simply a way for predators to seek out victims, whether the exploitation was going to be online, meaning that the predator would solicit or elicit nude photographs or sexual photographs, photographs in compromising positions from boys and girls, from underage people. That was sort of kind of where it began. And then, of course, it was a tool for meeting them. So now an individual who, this is just a few years ago and still happens today, an individual will use social media to actually establish a relationship and begin what we call the grooming process. And they'll begin grooming an underage person on, basically using online tools, messaging them, texting them, maybe imitating, sending pictures of somebody who isn't them. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. What we have seen that morph into now, and what we have seen really just since about 2022, I think is when OpenAI was first released. But certainly within the last 10, or excuse me, within the last 2 or 3 years, and it's becoming even a bigger problem every day, is the use of generative artificial intelligence tools. So the use of generative artificial intelligence tools is becoming extremely dangerous. And the way people are being victimized there, and this is across the board, this could be an infant on up to an elderly person, but it's ridiculously easy now for a perpetrator to obtain a photograph or several photographs of literally anybody. It could be somebody you see on the street. It could be somebody in your yearbook. It could be somebody photographed on your company's website. And through AI tools, both photographs and videos can be manufactured depicting that person, that victim in sexual situations, sexual poses, things of that nature, which can be unbelievably harmful and damaging on an emotional level. And again, we've already seen it. Many political leaders have experienced it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has experienced it. Individuals on the right side of the political spectrum have also experienced it. Women and men, mostly women, almost all women, but it's not exclusive to that. But aside from actresses, politicians, celebrities, there are also just plenty of people out there who are being victimized by AI tools. And unfortunately, social media is helping because social media is still, even though they are promising to get tougher about this, and even though they have their policies state that they don't allow for those types of online tools to be advertised, we still see them advertised constantly. So it is not uncommon at all to find on Instagram or Facebook, which are the meta platforms, it's not at all unusual to find an advertisement for one of these AI tools, so-called nudifying apps or video creation apps, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you had brought up AI because you, as you said, have said it as a new frontier of sexual exploitation. Do you see AI really helping kind of track down these people and track down these prosecutors before these victims fall, um, become in the hands of the perpetrator?
I don't I don't know yet that AI would be useful to prosecutors. I'm not sure. It's possible. I think one potential tool that AI could be used for in the hands of an investigator or a prosecutor. An investigator or a prosecutor uh, could create a video, basically attempting to lure a predatory person, which is not an uncommon thing, basically like a sting operation. So sure, I think it's possible that investigators could, we already have situations, and we have for years, we've had situations where investigators on both the state and the federal level will pose as an underage person, will pose as a 13-year-old child, will pose as a 14-year-old boy, in order to see if a predator attempts to actually meet with them or to exchange pornography with them, things of that nature. There's no reason that AI couldn't be used to generate images of. Now, of course, I hope it's clear. I certainly hope no investigator or prosecutor would ever create a pornographic image, even if it's AI generated. That's still illegal, and I don't think it's anything that prosecution would ever do. I certainly hope not. But I don't think it would be inappropriate for a prosecutor to generate using AI or an investigator to generate a non-sexual image of an underage person in an effort to establish a relationship with somebody who is potentially looking for victims, who's a child sex predator who's out there online. So I think that's one way that AI may be able to assist prosecutors. Otherwise, of course, artificial intelligence, we're only talking about generative video. I mean, artificial intelligence has so many applications for sifting through data and evidence. I'm sure there are millions of ways that, just as an attorney, I can't imagine all the ways that AI could be used in investigation and prosecution. But I absolutely think it's there. What I've been focusing on more lately is unfortunately how the bad guys are using it. Basically, what are they doing out there just to wreak havoc and just create so much damage with these images.
So how is it that so how can social media platforms and AI developers be held accountable for the spread of non-consensual sexualized content? And do you think that they're taking that responsibility seriously now?
Uh, I'm sorry, are you asking how? Are you talking about in the legal sense? Like, are there laws against non-consensual dissemination?
Could be like held accountable for the spread of the non-consensual content. So like it's like the AI sexualized images that get sent out.
Hmm.
I guess from a law standpoint, kind of how from like a kind of a law consent standpoint, probably.
Yeah, I mean, there are already laws in about 20 US states. There are laws that specifically prohibit the use of a generative AI feature, for example, to create a video without a person's consent or a photograph of a person without their consent and to turn it into something that's pornographic. So that already exists. In most states, it's still sort of a minor crime. Like in Virginia, for instance, it's a class one misdemeanor, which is serious. I mean, you can do 12 months in jail for that, but it's pretty much the same as like shoplifting, petty larceny. Those are class one misdemeanors as well. So there is criminalization, and that is probably helping. It's not easy to catch the people who are doing this. And, one of the big challenges we see is that there are a lot of relatively young children who are using this. So many incidents of generative AI, meaning a photograph of a girl, an underage girl, 12 or 13. Many, many, many times we're seeing that image is fed into an AI program by a boy who's about the same age, or sometimes a girl who's about the same age. So unfortunately, you have kids victimizing each other in a sense. It's the victims are almost always girls. The perpetrators are usually boys, although not exclusively. But oftentimes what we see is, somebody who's 12 or 13 or 14 who is capturing the image. Again, it could be from school, it could be from a yearbook, it could be from Facebook, could be from a million different places, and they are feeding that image and they're creating these using nudify apps and they're basically turning these images into pornography. So oftentimes the perpetrators are also kids. We do have a juvenile justice system, at least throughout the states, but we don't at the federal level. So it can be difficult to hold kids accountable for these crimes. And of course, when we're dealing with young adolescents, we're dealing with people who can't be, fully held responsible for their actions. They're children and they do dumb things and they're sexually curious. So I think we're looking at probably more of a treatment option for certainly for kids who are doing this. Now, for adults who are doing it, that's a much, much different story. And the criminalization of this helps. But I think what really needs to happen is more than anything right now, the various social media platforms need to crack down much, much, much harder than they are on keeping this technology out of the hands of people. Again, Meta has said on no uncertain terms, this is against our policy. If we see it, we will absolutely pull it off our platform. The problem is there are many AI companies that are using evasive measures to sort of get around the Facebook and Meta, or excuse me, the Facebook and Instagram filters. They're popping up as sort of, rather than companies, they're popping up as single individuals. things of that nature. And I understand that, I understand that. But regardless, the amount of money that these platforms generate, I'm sorry, but Meta has the money to stop this if they're serious about it. And they need to be more serious about it than they are. And it's not just Meta. I mean, we see it on other social media applications. We see it on X, formerly known as Twitter. There are all sorts of social media spaces and sites where these advertisements will pop up, and these companies are inviting people without sometimes they'll have an age restriction, but it's not enforceable, and it's really frightening. But right now, I think the law absolutely has a responsibility to help stop this. But I think before that, or while that process is going on, I think the companies that run massive social media platforms need to take a stronger hand.
I think another issue that kind of comes from it is a lot of people, I don't know how your reaction is to it, but some of these people that when they come finally get prosecuted and they go to the whole jail system, sometimes a lot of people don't understand or totally agree with the sentencing sometimes. Do you have there been any cases from your history and from your um past to where the person that got caught and was up against the judge didn't get a very serious jail time credit that you're like, he should have gotten more time, or have there just been any kind of bad calls on judging from?
Yeah, there have. And I think a lot of it, I can't think of one I was personally involved with, mostly because when I was involved with these cases, actually quite a few years ago now, I still do some training and consulting on the subject. But when I was actually in the courtroom, AI was not yet a technology. Now, of course,
Right.
I study and I follow the trends and I look at the cases that are happening, and I still have many friends who are still in both investigating and prosecuting, and they are almost always disappointed at the sentences. A lot of times the judges involved don't, or either they don't know or they won't consider the full extent. A perpetrator with 20 or 30 of these videos may actually have thousands, but it could be that they don't, that they either they don't know about them for some reason, it hasn't gotten into evidence, or the judge isn't willing to consider them. So absolutely. And I think, there are all sorts of fantasy defenses that come up too. There are many people who certainly, defense attorneys who represent individuals like this, they have a job to do, and they certainly have to represent their client's best interest. And a lot of times, what they'll claim to courts is, look, okay, my client might be creating images. Okay, maybe he's creating pornographic videos of even young children. And yes, that's horrifying. It's terrible. He shouldn't do that. But he is not hands-on abusing any children. So please, judge, remember that. This person, this is fantasy. This is what he does. It's all he's ever going to do. He's never going to lay a hand on a child. He's never going to push a child into a car or abduct or anything like that. This is what he does. It may be abhorrent, and he needs to stop doing it with regard to kids and non-consenting people, but he's not nearly as bad as somebody who, physically lays his hand on a child. That's a common defense that we see in these cases, and not just AI cases, but in child sex abuse materials, what we call CSAM. We see it and we've seen it in cases for years. And I'm not saying that isn't sometimes a valid defense. It could be that the individual who generates child pornography, particularly through AI means, uh, it may very well be that that person is simply engaging in fantasy, and even though what they're doing is abhorrent, they're not going to actually touch an actual child. But I would say two things. One, when victims discover that they have that images out there, innocent images of them have been turned into pornographic video, even if only one person has seen it, even if only the perpetrator has seen it, and of course investigators have seen it after an arrest or after evidence is gathered, even if there's a small handful of people, the effect on that person, the effect on the victimized person from having their image captured, from having these just horrendous videos being made of them, putting them in sexual situations, sexual positions, performing sexual acts. It really is a violence. It's extremely dangerous and very damaging on an emotional level. The second thing I would say is that although fantasy may be a valid defense, I think I'm a lawyer, not a psychologist, but I know some of the very best psychologists in the world that focus on abnormal psych and issues of this. And there are a lot of them who will tell you that, like almost any other intoxicant, if an individual, if he, uh, you know, experiences pleasure generating and looking at these images, eventually he's going to need more and more images. And eventually he's probably going to look to do hands-on offending because he's not going to get the same rush. So, an individual who generates and consumes child pornography or child sex materials, I think is still a danger to society because I think it's very possible that eventually they will move on to hands-on offending. And even if they don't, the amount of damage that they're doing to victims, again, we're taking images of people and turning them pornographic, I think is a tremendous, just a tremendously damaging event.
Yeah, I think it's social media has no easy thing, but another thing that kind of doesn't help is kind of like false news and kind of like fake news from journalists and stuff. So, um, how do you how do y'all handle journalists and legal professionals who kind of twist the truth a little bit? Because journalists seem to, and I'm a journalist as well. I majored in journalism, and so I kind of know how some journalists are. They like to really twist facts to get like a really compelling story. How do you handle journalists that twist the story around to make it to where they get more of the view view standpoint more than the facts, right?
Well, I think yeah, you're right. There is the challenge is to not only have the reporting done honestly, but to report it in the first place. I'm sure you know this as a trained journalist and as somebody who majored in journalism. I'm sure you know there are biases we're aware of and there are biases we're not aware of. And even in choosing what to write about, we're showing a bias, whether it's one that we understand or one that's unconscious, that we're unaware of. So that bias begins with even talking about this at all. And I think there are reporters probably who are attempting to who are still sort of shying away from this process just because either they're skeptical about whether it actually happens or they may very well believe, like frankly some of the perpetrators believe, that hey, this is fantasy, this is not something that we need to be worried about. And I think it's also fair to say if there's a reporter that has the choice between, okay, I've got a story about a girl that was actually, pulled off of a playground and maybe she was rescued, maybe she wasn't, but that seems to be more of a hard-hitting story than, just some terrible, pathetic guy who's sitting in his basement on his computer and generating images. Maybe that doesn't seem as salacious or so, those are the issues too, is what are we choosing to report is where it begins. And then once we're there, it's okay, are we choosing to report this fairly? And I am positive, like as you referred to fake news sites, there, of course, there's that. There are all sorts of voices on the internet, unfortunately, that are putting out misleading and sometimes just downright incorrect or information. There are, supposed men's rights groups that are out there claiming that uh, child sexual abuse is usually made up, that most children who report child sexual abuse are doing so at the behest of mothers who are seeking to engage or seeking to get an advantage in a custody battle. We hear that quite a bit. So yeah, there are all sorts of voices on the web that are going to downplay the victimization. Anywhere from this isn't happening to, well, if it is happening, look, it's just not that big deal. It's or big of a deal. It's not like getting grabbed in a hallway. It's not like being pulled off the street. It's just something you have to deal with. It's a part of living in the modern world. And I think those viewpoints are really horrible and sad, but I think they're still out there. And misogyny drives a lot of this. Just a sort of general hatred of women and all things feminine is still very strong out there. I mean, there's an incel community. There's again, the sort of pickup artist community a few years ago. I mean, there are quite a lot of people out there who sort of feel that they've been excuse me, unfairly treated by women, by feminism, by advances in what women have gained over the past decades, and there's a backlash there.
Another thing that I think a lot of people tend to um misconception is how some of the trauma victims act in a courtroom or how they're perceived in the media. So, what's what's typically the most damaging misconception that you still hear to this day about how survivors behave or remember events when they're in the courtroom and they're being covered by all these major media platforms and social media sites?
I think the most unfortunate thing is how many people still don't understand what in the anti-violence world we call counterintuitive behavior. The way that the way that victims of sexual assault and sexual violence react, there are all sorts of structures in the brain. There are all sorts of factors. There is cultural guilt, there is fear, there is shame. There are all these things that take place when an act of sexual violence or an act of sexual abuse occurs. And the stressors that is put on victims, sometimes we call them survivors, it oftentimes makes it difficult for them to report what it is that happened to them, and also it makes it very difficult for them to report it in a way that investigators will intuitively believe or accept. I'll give you a quick example. It's not at all uncommon when, an individual who experiences sexual violence, she probably won't remember things in a linear fashion, especially if alcohol is involved. So she may not remember uh, the exact series of events. She's more likely, or if the victim is a he's more likely to remember sensations, to remember, a particular smell at a particular point or a sound in the background. And, oftentimes it's frustrating. So an investigator sits down with somebody and, however many hundreds of years of how we investigate crimes in Anglo-American culture, it's okay, let's start from the beginning, give me the facts, what happened at 7 o'clock, what happened at 7:15, and so on. And many, many, many survivors of sexual violence can't recite events that way, or they certainly won't be able to for quite a while until their mind calms and various other things take place. So the misunderstanding of counterintuitive behavior, I think, is a big, big problem. And the other one is just sort of just the judging factor. There's a real impulse on the part of many, many, many people, otherwise good and decent people, but there is a big impulse on the part of many people to want to separate themselves from the horror of sexual assault. So if they're being called on a jury to determine whether a person is guilty in a sexual assault case, or if they're investigating it, or if they're just members of the public who are watching something on TV, oh, look what happened. This woman is claiming that she was raped by a celebrity. You know, they can be very, very quick to judge. And it's not simply because they're misogynistic, although sometimes they are. It's not simply because they believe that, oh, well, particularly if there's a celebrity involved, then the victim is probably not a real victim. She's probably doing this for money or fame. But even if it's not that, it may be as simple as, and people don't even know they're doing this, but basically what they're saying to themselves is, how can I distance myself from that horror? How can I how can I get a hold of this situation? I don't want to believe that I live in a world where this happens. So how can I look at this situation and blame this person? And that is the key. Victim blaming is very, very common. And again, victim blaming doesn't have to be totally judgmental. It doesn't have to be hateful. Oftentimes it's just, look, I'm not sure what happened to her, but I wish she hadn't walked down that alley. I wish she hadn't worn that skirt. I wish he hadn't used cocaine or alcohol. I wish he hadn't initiated something, whatever it is. They want to distance themselves from the horror, so they make a determination in their own minds that that victim did something that I wouldn't have done. I would have been able to avoid that. And therefore, it makes it much easier for them to say, I'm sorry, but I don't care as much about what happened to this person because I know I would have made better choices and I would have avoided that kind of situation. And that's very, very sad.
During your years, what tended to be the hardest part about the whole thing? Was it hearing stories, or was it kind of just trying to find and trying to get closure for these victims or survivors? What was the hardest part for you personally during this whole time?
I think the hardest part was, to me, the hardest part was helping survivors come to terms with things like disbelief, with the stuff that I've just explained to you. The most positive times I had as a prosecutor with these cases was not necessarily when a conviction was won, either by a plea or a win at trial. Those are very gratifying moments because you feel as if you feel as if justice has been done. I mean, nothing in a courtroom is going to undo the horror and the victimization that occurs on the street. That's not how criminal litigation does not put people back together when they've been broken. That happens through that healing process is a much different process, and the criminal justice system is not really that's not really what it does. Uh, Regardless, of course, if we had a conviction, if we won at trial or we got a plea, yeah, that felt very good um, because we felt as if justice was done. But even if we didn't, even if there was an acquittal, even if for whatever reason, or if the case just couldn't be made, you know, I felt okay as long as I believed that the survivors felt that they had been heard. They appreciated that I believed them. They appreciated that the investigators believed them. They appreciated that there was this core of people in the investigation and prosecution community, victim advocates, individuals that would help as victim witness associates. There were various people in the office that would help kind of steer the process. And that was the best part. But it was very hard when we also realized that, hey, man, there are dozens and dozens of people out there, maybe even more, that don't believe you for whatever reason, particularly if it was a case involving a well-known person or, an adolescent or an adult or something where the news picked up, and if the news picks up the case, then you get hundreds and hundreds, if not more, really cruel comments. I don't believe this person, or even if she was sexually assaulted, well, she clearly had it coming because she made these choices. She did things I wouldn't have done. What the heck's wrong with her? All that kind of stuff. That was the hardest part, is having to absorb that along with the survivor, not in the same way and not to the same extent, but having to absorb that and hoping that I could convince them that what they were hearing was not the norm. It was just sort of hateful noise. That was tough.
In terms of today, do you see kind of the have you seen progress in the justice system after years of being working in the justice system? Do you see us kind of moving forward and kind of moving toward a more formed, compassionate, and just more appropriate approach to sexual violence?
Yes, I absolutely think we're moving in the right direction. We have a long way to go. A long way to go. But yeah, I mean, it would be insulting to the, thousands and thousands of women and men who have helped change it to claim that it hasn't changed. I mean, the system is much better for victims than it was even 15 years ago. So we've made great strides, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I think the one place where we have the most work to do is with individuals who are marginalized, frankly. And in the anti-violence world, we call those underserved populations. So people who are experiencing homelessness, for instance, who are relatively powerless, people who are suffering under immigration quotas. I mean, just not to make this political, but just to be brutally honest, that's a big part of it. If you're in the middle of an immigration crackdown where hundreds of thousands of people are being basically haunted by the federal government and tracked down at churches and courtrooms and things, those individuals are not going to report crimes the way they would have before. And perpetrators know this and they act accordingly. But not just that, individuals who identify as homosexual, individuals who are trans, these types of individuals historically have not been treated fairly by law enforcement. They haven't been treated fairly by society. And I think, and again, perpetrators know this, and it is so sad, but it's so true. An individual who is impacted sexually, who is attacked, who is singled out by a predatory person, predators are like all things that hunt. They follow the path of least resistance and greatest security. So it's not at all uncommon for a predatory person to seek out somebody who seems powerless, to seek out, a child who doesn't come from a two-parent background, a child who seems disconnected, a child who has a disability, autism, things of that nature, a child who appears to be emerging as homosexual and may be confused about their sexuality. All of these, unfortunately, can lead perpetrators to focus on that person as a victim. And I think that's really where we need to focus is continue to think about where are the who are the underserved populations and what are we doing for them? These are people who are in the shadows. And again, some of the reason they're in the shadows is because of policy choices, government choices. Some of it's cultural and religious bias. Some of it's just, kind of cultural and social history. But I think that's where we need to focus most.
What's kind of your message to survivors that maybe still be dealing with that trauma that they've gone through? What's kind of your message and best piece of advice you have for them of how they can get through that difficult time?
I would say my overall message is absolutely seek help because it is out there. There are more resources for men in particular than there ever have been, but for women as well. My belief is that therapy is really the only way out. It has to be the hurt has to be processed, and that really is the bailiwick. That's the expertise of the psychological community. There are really, really wonderful responders, and and it doesn't have to be super expensive. Rape crisis centers generally around the country can assist victims with, or assist survivors, I should say, with developing the strategies to find the right people. There are all sorts of major websites out there. I have a website, rogercanaff.com, where I list out some of these entities and some of these sites, and I'm more than happy if your listeners reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help put them into that kind of. It's not care that I can provide. I mean, again, I'm from the legal field. It's not what I do, but I know wonderful, wonderful women and men who do this kind of work, and the resources are absolutely out there. And that is the thing that I would say above anything else is, don't walk around assuming that you're the only person that this has happened to, and don't feel as if you have to bear it all yourself.
What advice do you have for future people that are studying to be kind of as a special victims prosecutor? They might want to follow the same career you did. What's some good advice you have for them on what they are potentially going to witness and endure and encounter when they take on this really, really difficult job?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the frontier right now is technology. I mean, I would encourage somebody, someone who is interested in law enforcement, somebody who's interested in either investigating or prosecuting these cases. I think having a good, solid technological background is going to be helpful because we're going to need more and more responders, meaning professional responders. We're going to need more and more investigators, and we're going to need more and more prosecutors who understand the technology behind the victimization, because I think we're going to be seeing that more and more. There all the other stuff applies. I mean, traditional trial skills and basically the path toward law school, and all of that stuff is of course important, and whether or not you have the bent for it and you want to put up with it. And I didn't enjoy law school very much, but I love being an attorney, so I don't regret it. But specifically to somebody who, maybe they're already in law school or they're on the way and they're saying, okay, this is the difference I want to make. I want to get into a DA's office around in the United States, and I want to make a difference here. I honestly, right now, I think the thing that I would say above all else is develop some technological background, some technological skills, and understand the nature of the technology behind this. And generative AI is going to be with us, you know, for the duration. It's not going anywhere, and I think it's important that we understand it as well as possible.
Well, Roger, I think I really appreciate you for coming on the show and telling this because I think it's a really important thing for people to um know about the kind of the secrets that kind of go into working with into really sexual violence cases. I think it's really important for people to know what's going on because I think it kind of gets put under the rug a lot. So if people want to reach out to you and they want to learn more about um this kind of career and maybe they have questions for you, where can they best get in contact with you at? And feel free to kind of promote anything you have going on of social media accounts so they can get in contact and connect with you as well.
Sure. I mean, the easiest way to find me is through my website, and it's myname.com. So it's ROGERCANAFF AFF, like Frank at the end. So rogercanaff.com. That'll take you right to me. There aren't many people who have the same spelling as my last name in the United States. I mean, literally, I'm related to almost all of them. So I'm pretty easy to find online, but rogercanaff.com is a good place. I do, I lay out all sorts of issues there. I talk a lot about this stuff. And again, I can absolutely help point you toward help if that's what you're looking for right now.
Well, I will put all of his links in the description box below so that if you are curious and have questions for him, and maybe you would like to learn more about what he has to offer, feel free to get in contact with him as well. Um, Feel free to follow the podcast on social media as well, Instagram and TikTok at Lethal Venom Podcast, as well as follow the uh, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast so you can get updates about the podcast on the social media side. And as always, listen to Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm available on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora. It's everywhere, so feel free to subscribe so you get notified of when new episodes drop. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today's episode. Hope you all enjoyed it. Y'all all have a great rest of your day. Be safe, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Lethal Venom.